Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Before being a senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice, Dorothy Samuels was a member of the New York Times editorial board. And for 30 years, through 5 different presidential administrations, she commented on a wide array of legal and public policy issues. I'm more than curious about what she'd write today and actually where she would even start. So, what would you do?
Where I'd start is this country is in unprecedented territory, and we're in terrible trouble in terms of our democracy and progress on issues that many Americans care about and which have come to be an ingrained part of being American and living in American, and that includes the Civil Rights Revolution and revering that.
So where do we start? Appointments? Regulations?
Well, I think where we start is who is president.
Yeah.
And the person who is about to become president of this country is a very strange, bizarre figure, and who really is sort of a strongman type. He's an autocrat, narcissist, literally with shrinks diagnosing him from afar, and a bully. And we don't know really what he thinks. We don't know really what his financial assets are. We can't even judge what conflicts they are. We just know they're enormous. And he doesn't have the usual sense of self-control and of respect for democratic values. So we don't just go on the attack and rip apart everybody who dares say anything even halfway critical.
What makes him the autocrat instead of just a bully?
Well, I guess he's both, and I think being an autocrat is probably both. You'd have to look in the dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
But the autocratic nature that you worry about is a guy who has no measure of no restraint, I think, really core values other than his own power, his own self-aggrandizement, and we see that every time he talks. We have to relive the election, and we have to denigrate everybody associated with the Clinton campaign, and day by day, even to the point. The guy is just so reckless and such a bully, and in everything he says, shows such a disrespect for institutions in our society like the press, like the fact that a majority of Americans actually did not vote for him, and most normal people, just even showing respect for democracy, and most Americans would sort of go back and really try and be inclusive. We don't know what he's going to do. What we do know is that he has appointed a cabinet that is utterly bent. His agenda on one hand is a little hazy in how he articulated it during the campaign and since, but what we know is he's appointed people to absolutely undo progress on rights and everything else, and to actually, we have cabinet departments and agencies that are supposed to perform functions for the public good, and he's appointed, in almost every case, people who are against the very function, want to change the function. That's pretty scary stuff.
What also scares me is when we talk about autocrat, I don't think he has a basic ideology. He just has such confidence in himself. He has no self-doubt at all. So whatever he's thinking, he thinks is right. I can't explain it.
Well, whatever he's thinking at the moment, because he does.
It's so erratic.
He'll vacillate.
Right.
And also, I think the campaign and the fact he did win in a fashion that is very disturbing.
Right.
By reaching out with a racist message, by targeting, what an autocrat does is he or she targets specific groups to get ahead, to work up the hate, and sometimes, as we have seen in the world, in ways that are very dangerous, even physically, for those groups. And so I don't know what we're going to be looking forward to on, say, immigration, whatever, but we already know that there are Muslim families in the United States who are living in fear, Muslim children who are being harassed in school, and we know that hate incidents are up. And he claims no responsibility, but of course
He's responsible.
he's responsible. And that message goes out, and he has shown traits that other people who are in history, largely abroad, but some at home, it's caused real harm to people and for democratic values for a long time.
And the people that he relies on for advice, the people around
Are
him.
very scary.
Yeah.
They are very scary. And so making the turn to the new administration for Americans who care about those values, and that includes a lot of people, I think, who voted for Trump. I think making that turn is going to be very hard and very sad. And if I were still at the Times, I'd be saying largely what the editorial board at the Times has been saying. We got to fight. You can't just accept this stuff. You got to stand up. You got to present your own evidence. You got to alert people to what's happening. And we can't normalize the kind of values and bullying that this guy is proceeding to try and make American values, to replace our traditional values. The other thing that's, of course, very disturbing is this guy, and very scary, he's coming to the presidency with almost no base of knowledge, right? It would be the idea that he is so egomaniacal, narcissistic, that he changes nuclear policy with a tweet. And that's not even the worst part, I think, right? When he says, we got to get more nukes, right? Overturning all these thoughtful people. You can have a debate about nukes and the nuclear arsenal and whatever. The next day, when his people are asked, and he's asked, why are you changing something so serious like nuclear policy with a tweet? You're scaring countries all over the world and Americans. What they do is they deny it, which goes to maybe the scariest thing about the administration and Trump, a total disregard for truth.
Totally.
So there is almost no way to counter him. We could spend our time, firstly, the press doing its job cannot catch up with every lie this man tells. And not only every lie, every important lie, right? So I'm not even talking about catching up with the lies. I was the greatest student at Wharton. I'm such a smart guy. I was #1 in my class. When an easy check finds, not only was not #1, but he didn't get in originally, got in by his, all of that. But on the big ones, about whether the tweet actually in black and white says it, where Kellyanne Conway asked about that nuclear tweet, she responds in the most remarkable but really frightening fashion, because she said, with Donald Trump, you don't pay attention to the words. You pay attention to what's in his heart. Sort of giving him this free pass there. Let him say whatever he wants, because he's really this great guy. Well, I haven't seen the great guy in a long time.
So he says the first thing he's going to do is change regulations?
Well, in terms of executive actions, he's going to turn back a lot of government regulations, and that's going to include a restoration in the area of reproductive rights. He's going to reinstate what's called the gag rule, which means cutting off funding to all these wonderful groups abroad who play this very important life-saving role in largely basically spreading family planning to parts of the world that desperately need it, because certain groups involved also perform abortions, which last I looked is, I don't know how long, but it's still legal in America and very important to women's well-being and even to prevent deaths. So that will change right off. Executive orders by President Obama or by the Justice Department, trying to enforce fairness and disclosure in areas of civil rights, they will go right away. We don't know exactly what's going to happen on the military and all of the progress that's been made on gays in the military, transgenders being able to serve in the military. We're not sure of that. We do know pretty well that if Jeff Sessions becomes our Attorney General, we'll have a guy in charge of the Justice Department, the main area of the government that's supposed to enforce American rights, actually trying to unwind American rights in ways that I'm not sure Americans are really. This is going to be a very radical overturning, and some of that is through regulations. We're going to see, no matter what happens or how quickly on the Affordable Care Act, we will see the free access to contraception that has been such a boon, as the studies have shown, for not only women's rights, but for cutting down abortions.
Right.
Not only for preserving the health
Right.
of women, but for literally preventing many thousands of abortions. They're going to do away with that. And that goes to another area, Ronnie, that is of deep concern, rarely discussed, has a lot to do with the Republican agenda of Trump, but also in Congress, and certainly of his Vice President Pence, which is a religious agenda, and that is to impose the religious beliefs of the Catholic Church and evangelical Christians, a very tiny segment of America, or rather small, on everybody else. And that's what a lot of this, honestly, is about.
Before we take to the next step of what you're talking about, environmental regulations, all of those, we haven't even begun.
Well, Paul Krugman has written, and it's not an exaggeration, it's that the election of Trump could literally mean the end of the world, or certainly make it come faster. There really is no time left on stopping the greenhouse gases. And the idea that we have, first of all, we have a president who says he's not sure, right? He's open-minded about global warming. We actually have regulators who want to do away with that, who think we should go back to coal. You know, President Obama has never gotten the credit he deserves for ending our incredible dependency on Middle East states for our oil.
He's going to get more credit as we go along.
I think, and I've had my disagreement, arguably I've spent the better part of 8 years writing criticism. I don't think he was, for example, hard enough on providing compensation to the victims of the Bush-era torture policies. But that being said, this man is an amazing man. You know, there's never a moment I haven't thought he was working, for the United States in a very thoughtful way, maybe sometimes too deliberate. But in his way, especially when the Democrats had control of Congress, he changed this country in major ways and always kept fairness and non-discrimination and realizing the ideals of our country, just always in the forefront in a classy way. I also think, and this means something to me as someone who writes, is he will also go down, other than Lincoln, I believe, as the greatest writer ever in the Oval Office.
Now, do you think the Supreme Court nomination is going to be the most destructive?
Well,
how can we say that? Everything's going to be destructive.
Well,
we think.
He has given us we know it will be destructive. He has given us a list that he'll be working off, supplied by the Federalist Society. And I think a week ago he doubled down that is his list, and he'll be working from that, not just for the Supreme Court openings, including the first one that's coming up, but also for filling a lot of vacancies that are automatically his in this illegitimate way, because the Republicans refused at a very early point to approve of very mainstream nominees of the president, including Merrick Garland, to fill the Scalia seat.
And when you're talking about the other appointments, you mean the lower courts,
the district courts.
There are hundreds of them, aren't there?
Well, he'll have over 100 appointees off the bat, I believe.
Right, it's incredible.
Well, and that will begin to change the character of circuits and where you can go. But this nominee, there are two problems right now. One immediate problem is, what does Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, and arguably the most important Democrat now in the country, what the hell does he do about the fact that this vacancy that is there for the Scalia seat never should have been there? So how do you get over the fact that they waited in order to put in for the chance if Trump were nominated, and perhaps even after that, because they refused to view any Democrat going back to Bill Clinton as a legitimate president. So what do you do about the fact they shouldn't have had this vacancy?
Right. How many votes do they need to confirm?
Well, right now they can filibuster But if they actually tried to filibuster, how long the filibuster would last is a very, very big question. It's very dubious. But when Chuck Schumer says, yeah, these are bad, because if you look, trust me, if you look at the records of this list that he's working off of for Supreme Court justice and other judges, in terms of rights enforcement, in terms of the environment, putting business before American rights, all of that, reproductive rights, this is a very frightening
It mirrors
list.
the cabinet appointment.
Yes, and worse, most of them, I'd say, worse than the person in the case of Scalia, which is the immediate opening, worse, because Scalia, at times, say in the First Amendment area or whatever, and at times I didn't agree with him even in there, but he was known to vary. He wasn't all just ideological right.
You know, what's most shocking to me is that the Constitution, there is no way for us to stop him. There's no way to have made him divulge what his business is or what the contacts he has, so that we don't know, as you said before, his conflicts of interest. There's no protection against
the Constitution
President of the United States.
Well, in theory, there is some protection.
Yeah.
It's not going to stop him,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting. There is something called the Emoluments Clause that has been receiving
some attention.
rare attention. It's sort of an unsung provision of the Constitution, and it was really passed more in the beginning of our country when there was a real worry that France, with a lot of money, would try and basically buy the American government and influence the American government. Sound familiar? But the Emoluments Clause now, this guy becomes president. His interests that he's refused to relinquish all over the world, you know, to his giving it to his family and no real separation. We don't know the business interests all over the world. We would have a chance of knowing it if he had ever divulged his taxes, but we don't. So we don't know whether he's in violation day one in his presidency of the Constitution, and B, the Constitution is not self-enforcing largely. It would take a Congress to act, an all Republican-controlled Congress, both chambers, to say you're in violation of the Emoluments Clause or let's look into it. The chance that's going to happen is zero.
Have the Republicans been so successful that the moderate Republicans who might have the conscience and awareness of it are in such a minority they can't affect
Well, Ronnie, you
the
know this as
Republican
well as I
majority?
do. Number one, the moderates were never that moderate,
You're right.
and we haven't had Jacob Javitz's for many a moon. The era when the Republicans are the people we relied on to advance civil rights, as happened with the '64 Civil Rights Act, right? Those days are gone a long time. Today, there are very few even purported moderates, and they have very little courage, honestly. They occasionally, you know, a Susan Collins will vote in a different way. Occasionally that will make a difference. But mostly she, if you look at her voting record, and this is before this, maybe she will rise to the occasion at a moment when our country and its values are in maximum danger and the institutions of democracy. But I'm not that all optimistic. But what a lot of these so-called moderates, who are a very, you know, a dwindling breed and tiny in Congress, what they basically do is they will cast votes when it's meaningless. That is when the leadership lets them go off on a tangent.
Yeah.
The number of times they will take an independent stance to stop something really terrible in recent years has been awful, and there are very few of them.
So what we have to hope for, maybe, is that in the so-called red congressional districts, in 2 years, those people aren't as red as the members of Congress, that Democrats might be able to defeat some of them so that you can begin to change?
Those districts in Congress, in the House,
Yeah.
which are not an entire state, as you know, those
They're
have been so gerrymandered.
Yeah.
And the Republicans were so smart, pre-Trump, about getting control of the apparatus and focusing on election of governors. The Democrats now have what, I think less than a quarter or maybe around a quarter of the governorships. And we have all these states now that are controlled by not only Republican governors who are very right-wing, but also Republican legislatures.
And since the census is taken every 10 years, the next presidential election is in 2020, that won't reflect the census of that year, right?
We're not there yet.
Yeah,
There are,
it's terrible.
There's, I think 1 or 2 states or districts where there are lawsuits going on about redistricting, trying to wind it back, where people felt that it was unconstitutional. President Obama says that in his ex-president capacity, he's going to focus
Right.
on redistricting. It's one of those things you wish now you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
We should have been doing more of that
Right.
before.
So what we have are not only the worries about the issues that that the president's going to do in his own power, the future of legislation in the Congress, and then the Supreme Court. It's a triple whammy.
Yes, and that has largely been a lot to worry about for a long time. But for example, the last time the Republicans in Congress tried to defund Planned Parenthood, which that looks like that's going to become a reality. It's likely to, the actual defunding. What stopped it? What stopped it was a veto pen picked up by President Obama. That veto pen obviously is not going to be there anymore, right?
Right.
President Obama acted, I guess, in a way that we depended on and relied on, and was almost received scant coverage.
Yeah, right,
In a way that's going to be, we're going to miss that pen a lot.
right. And the way of the healthcare legislation. How many times did they?
It is unimaginable to me, and the height of recklessness, and I don't get how there isn't a revolution. We have, 30 million, 20 million people who got health care who didn't have it. Their lives have been made better, and there are lots of testimony to that and lots of studies to that effect. Most of those people are probably people who voted for Trump. I don't get it, and I don't get the nerve of the Republicans to be going forward with starting the unraveling of Obamacare without telling us how they replace it, because if they do it honestly, and if Trump, who keeps saying, this is going to be wonderful, this is going to be better than Obamacare, there are going to be more people covered, it's going to be perfect, and everything you like about Obamacare
It's going to be there.
is going to be there. Well, you can't do it without an enormous sum of money and without plans. The smartest people, think tanks who work on this, right, for decades, they can't tell you how to do it. So imagine the fear in the heart of people who rely on this insurance, who, the other thing I have to tell you, Ronnie, between us, it is so galling to have these people who throughout the Obama presidency, number one, refused to talk about passing a health care plan that was good for Americans and an improvement first, and did everything in their power to block Obamacare. But then any big program like Social Security, any big government program needs tweaking. You're not going to get it all right,
Exactly.
especially since it's a compromise. So there are portions no one knew how to
And we had all the history of that with Social Security.
They
and all that.
refused to sit down with the president, right? Instead of having these problems grow larger, little tweaks make it better.
They accused him of not talking to
To
them.
them, how many times did this man try to talk to them?
Right.
And now they're saying
Right.
it was terrible? Well, anything that was terrible really resulted from either compromises that Obama made to get the insurance industry out of his hair and not block it like the insurance industry blocked health reform under Bill Clinton. And the second reason was so maybe he would get Republicans. Got no Republicans, none.
And they demonized it so that people didn't even know what they were thinking when they said, oh, we have to get rid of Obamacare. They had no idea what it was.
Well,
Right.
Planning for leaving the hospital and going on hospice, if you recall, was death squads. I'd argue that President Obama never adequately answered it. He did answer it, but to get heard in the media world,
Times,
you have to say it a million times in different places, get it tweeted, get it picked up, go viral, all these things. But Obamacare, the truth is, Mitch McConnell won what was supposed to be a very close election in Kentucky, which is the state that, as I recall, relies on with the largest percentage of the state on Obamacare,
Right.
and
it expanded Medicaid. didn't
right,
it?
right, and benefiting from it and not fully appreciating who made that possible. McConnell ran on a platform of we're going to keep, you want your kids on, we keep that. That's not Obamacare. Essentially, denial that what these people liked was Obamacare, and number one on his agenda was repeal.
Right.
It's a level of galling that's amazing.
So I don't want to tell you this, but we've come to the end of this program. So we're going to have to come back. We're going to have to watch, and you'll come back, and we'll discuss things as
I hope
they get
I got to tell you,
revealed.
I hope American resilience shows itself.
Yes.
But a lot of that is going to come from people, citizens, ordinary citizens, letting their representatives at every level know how strongly they feel against what's being done.
We saw the beginning of it last weekend.
Yeah.
With the Obamacare. We'll see it again with the women's marches all over the country, but they have to be encouraged and to do more.
And those marches have to be planned to be inclusive. We all have to be, get over things. We need to include, women have to
Everybody.
include men. We have to include people who disagree on other things. And we have to show representatives that we mean business.
Yeah. Thank you, Dorothy Samuels.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure. We at CUNY TV always like to hear from our viewers. So if you have any subjects you'd like to explore or people you'd like to hear, please let us know. Write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or go to our website, cuny.tv, and click on Contact Us. We look forward to hearing from you.